We must defend it in action. We must reject policies and treaties that bind nations in economic shackles while pretending to offer freedom. We must expose covert operations, manipulation of local politics, the orchestration of coups disguised as democratic transitions. You mentioned the drones over your skies, Captain Traore, machines that hum with foreign code and foreign command.
I write to you not from a palace nor from the comforts of foreign embassies, but from the soil of my homeland, the land of Burkina Faso, where dust mingles with the blood of our martyrs, and the echoes of revolution are louder than the hum of foreign drones overhead. I am not writing as a man seeking approval, nor as one entangled in diplomatic pleasantries. I write to you as a son of Africa, bold, bruised, unbowed. You are now the spiritual father to more than 1 billion souls, including millions here in Africa. You inherit not just a church but a legacy, and in this moment of transition, while white smoke still lingers above Vatican rooftops, I must send this letter across seas and sands, beyond guards and gates directly to your heart, because history demands it, because truth compels it, because Africa, the wounded and the rising, is watching. Your Holiness, we Africans know the power of the cross. We know the hymns, the prayers, the litanies. We have built churches with calloused hands and defended our faith with our blood. But we also know another truth, one that too many prefer to bury, that the church at times walked beside colonizers, that while missionaries prayed for our souls, soldiers looted our lands, that while your predecessors spoke of heaven, our ancestors were chained on earth.
To His Excellency President Ibrahim Traore, President of the sovereign nation of Burkina Faso, son of the African soil, defender of his people, may grace and peace be multiplied to you through wisdom, courage, and truth. I received your letter not as a political communique, nor as a demand echoing through diplomatic channels. I received it as a cry of the soul, powerful, principled, and painful, from a son of the continent that has known too much loss, too much silence, and too many broken promises. I have read your words, not once, but many times, and each reading pierced deeper than the last, for in your voice I heard not merely the anger of a president, but the righteous cry of a continent, long wounded by the dual blades of neglect and exploitation. Let me begin now with defense, but with confession. Yes, the Church has, at moments in history, stood beside colonizers, when it should have stood beside the crucified. Yeah, there were chapters, some long, some shamefully brief, where the mission of salvation became entangled in the machinery of subjugation, where the banner of the cross was hoisted beside flags of empire, and the teachings of Christ were diluted by the ambitions of kings. For these sins, sins of omission and commission, I bow my head in repentance. No institution, however sacred, is above self-examination, and if the Church is to remain a beacon, it must not only shine light outward, it must shine it within. You ask, will this papacy be different? And to that I reply, not only will it be different, it must be. For too long the African voice has been heard only in whispers. Your leaders have been praised only when they were pliable, and demonized when they dared to defy unjust systems. Your resources have been extracted while your people were left to scavenge what was theirs to begin with. But Africa is not a charity case. Africa is not a patient waiting for the West to administer spiritual or political anesthesia. Africa is the cradle of courage, the wellspring of song, the pulse of prophecy. It is not the world's burden, it is its teacher. Let me speak plainly, as you did, President Traore, on colonial legacy. President Traore, you spoke of chains not only of those that bound the bodies of our ancestors, but the invisible ones that still clutch at the soul of Africa. Let us speak truth, not as adversaries, but as men burdened with memory. Colonialism was not simply a political conquest, it was a spiritual betrayal. It was not just the theft of land, but the attempted erasure of identity. Entire civilizations with their poetry, their proverbs, their cosmologies, their sacred rhythms were silenced under foreign flags and foreign gods. The missionaries, some sincere, came with crosses in one hand, but behind them followed gunboats, traders, and governors with contracts of domination. Baptismal fonts were built. Next to whips, scriptures were preached, beside swords. The story of Christ who came to liberate was too often retold in the language of control, and though many of those missionaries gave their lives in service, and some stood up to the powers of empire, the broader truth remains. The church did not always stand with the oppressed. Too often it stood with the conqueror. I confess this not as a political calculation, but as a moral reckoning. Because if the church is to truly mirror Christ, then it must weep where Christ would weep. And surely he weeps for what was done in his name on African soil. I have seen the ruins of colonial prisons turned into schools. I have met grandmothers who remember their tribes being renamed. I have watched as young African seminarians ask, is this faith ours, or was it imported? Let me answer clearly, the gospel was never meant to conquer. It was meant to liberate. Christ was never a colonizer. He was a carpenter from Nazareth, brown-skinned, occupied, poor. And so I pledge that under this papacy we will revisit our history, not to dwell in guilt, but to root out denial, not to perform penance with words, but to open doors with justice. The church must become not a reminder of conquest, but a refuge for cultural rebirth. Let the next chapter be one written together by African hands in African languages, and in full ownership of faith that was never truly foreign, but always somehow destined to rise again from African soil. On economic injustice, President Traore, when you speak of blood-stained minerals and hunger in the shadow of gold mines, you are not exaggerating. You are revealing a wound that the world has chosen to dress with silence. Africa is rich, yet too many of her children remain poor. Why so? Because the wealth beneath your soil, cobalt, gold, uranium, coltan, oil, has been turned into a curse, not a blessing. These were supposed to be gifts of providence, not instruments of plunder. But instead of building schools, they have built empires far from the shores of Africa. Let us no longer pretend that economic suffering is accidental. Let us no longer speak of underdevelopment as if it were nature's plan. It was policy, it was greed, it was engineered stagnation, orchestrated debt, and predatory agreements signed in glass towers, while farmers walked barefoot through dust. And yes, while the church itself may not have signed trade deals or drawn oil contracts, it has often been too quiet when it should have cried out, too cautious when it should have stood between the vulnerable and the vultures, too diplomatic when the gospel demanded disruption. There are African nations today where a child cannot drink clean water, but multinationals extract billions from the same land without paying fair dues. There are communities where women give birth in candlelight hospitals, while cargo ships full of precious resources sail out of port, guarded by foreign guns. That is not trade. That is tribute extracted from the wealthy. And this, dear brothers and sisters of the world, is not just an African tragedy. It is a global scandal. It is the failure of our collective morality. It is the blasphemy of preaching justice on Sunday while investing in systems of extraction on Monday. President Traore, you asked, will the Vatican name these sins? Yes, we will no longer speak of poverty without naming its architects. We will challenge institutions that pretend benevolence while negotiating for control behind closed doors. We will no longer sit at global summits in silence when African leaders are told to privatize their future in exchange for short-term loans. The church must not merely advocate for aid, it must fight for equity. We must speak of economic repentance, for true peace cannot exist where there is structural theft, where prosperity for the few is built on the perpetual depletion of the many, where Africa must always borrow back its own wealth with interest. This papacy will seek partnerships with African economists, theologians, and reformers. We will ask not how we can help Africa, but how we can dismantle the systems that have hurt her for centuries. And let us be clear, Africa does not need saving. Africa needs space to breathe, to rise, to govern her destiny without manipulation masked as mentorship. Let this be the era when the Church uses its global influence not to advise politely, but to advocate prophetically. Because economic justice is not a matter of numbers, it is a matter of soul. When a mother in Ouagadougou or Goma or Bamako weeps because her educated son cannot find dignified work, or when she buries that son because he drowned trying to flee to a distant shore, we must ask, what gospel are we preaching if it does not confront the system that made that death inevitable? We must ask ourselves, what is the value of prayer if it does not drive us toward justice? And so I say to you, President Traore, and to all of Africa, the church cannot be neutral in the face of economic oppression. Christ overturned the tables once. Now we must ask whose tables must be turned today. On political interference and sovereignty, President Traore, when you speak of sovereignty, your voice carries the weight of centuries, during which the African will has been contested, corralled and conditioned by powers that did not emerge from the soil of Africa, but planted themselves there like towering foreign trees, casting long shadows across native lands. The struggle for African self-determination is not a new cry. It is the old song of resistance that began when the first maps were drawn without your consent, when borders were carved by the hands of colonial ambition, and when leaders chosen not by your people but by distant interests were placed like marionettes in high office. And yet, even as flags changed and independence was declared, interference did not end. It merely changed form. Today it comes in the language of strategic partnerships, in the packaging of humanitarian aid, in the presence of military bases that were never democratically invited. We call them allies, and some may well be. But we must also ask, why does Africa remain a battlefield for the interests of others? Why must your internal affairs be negotiated in foreign capitals before they are respected at home? Why are African elections monitored with suspicion, while fraudulent dealings elsewhere are called irregularities? Why is it, President Traore, that when an African leader speaks of nationalizing resources, he is accused of authoritarianism, but when a foreign CEO exploits those same resources, he is praised as an innovator? We have built a global order where some nations act with impunity while others must beg for legitimacy.
I hope that you are doing good wherever you're watching from. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I greet you in a good way. So immediately, just take a look at this video. This is immediately after the Pope, the new Pope Leo was elected. The world and everyone in the world at large was very happy. People in Rome were just waiting. The town of Rome, the city of Rome, was at standstill, just waiting to see the white smoke. And after it appeared, this is how the express was seen in the faces of the people. And you know, once the Pope is elected, a Pope is a very big name in the world. A Pope is a very great name in the in world history, because you know, a Pope controls a very large number of people. When Pope says something, it means a lot. When Pope says something, people have to put it in measure and have to consider about it. So that's why you before the new Pope, Pope Francis, when he was in power, when he was visiting any of state, maybe in Africa or even in European countries, things were different. The countries or the city that he was visiting, everything was standstill, and that means that this is a very highly respected person in the face of the earth. So when a leader or any political leader or a head of state raises his concerns or his issues to Pope, it means a lot. Because these are the people who are controlling the world. These are the people who are giving the policies of the world. Because once the Pope has said or has spoken his voice, it means a lot to a lot of people. The crowd are listening to the voice of the Pope. You know that today, when Pope comes out and says something to any country of the world, then this thing is going to be that were past. They were not engaging in politics at much that, but they were coming to speak out when things have come to us. And immediately after, Pope has chosen Ibrahim Traore, our head of our African king, African leader, had to send a message to Pope, and he raised several concerns, demanding some issues, some measures to be taken concerning his leadership in Burkina Faso. And you've listened the speech of Ibrahim Traore and what he has to say. So he put several measures and several concerns that he wanted the Pope Leo to look at and to bring and to react about the speech or statement that he made. And immediately after, we've been waiting for several days or several months, but finally the Pope Leo has responded to the letter Ibrahim Traore wrote to him, and he has, by doing this, he has shown the good image in the world leadership. Because you know that when any leader comes up doing some things that maybe the leaders of church, like bishops of the high ranks, the popes or the archbishops, are now becoming against of him, it means that the person is out of control when it comes to leadership. So when you see a pope comes out and speak, it means a lot. Even the world leaders know about this. They cannot assume to what the Pope has said, because when Pope speaks, it means that the voice of thousands and millions of people have been spoken. Not his voice only, but he is representing millions of people. And when he speaks, then the action must be taken immediately. And I like the concerns that he has put up across, and all that he has addressed. This is the words the world has to know. Africa has not been taken seriously as the continent of the people, of humans who are living, who deserve the respect, who deserves the peace, who deserves the best. But Africa has been just taken like something that, like, once a time I came across, when I don't know who this guy was, when he said that Africa is a dump site, or is a cemetery of Africans.
Vladimir Putin says Africa is a cemetery for Africans. When an African becomes rich, his bank accounts are in Switzerland. He travels to France for medical treatment. He invests in Germany. He buys from Dubai. He consumes Chinese. He prays in Rome or Mecca.
And this meant a lot. Africa is a cemetery for the Africans. And that's why Africa has never been respected. Because in some people's eyes, or in some people's sights, they see Africa like a dumping site. They see Africa just like a cemetery. And that's why, as you know, you cannot respect a cemetery. That's a place that we go to bury the deads. So how can you respect that place? So when you can compare the continent of Africa to a cemetery, it means that you have disrespected the continent of Africa at a high level. And just like Ibrahim Traore has severally said or addressed these issues on how the African, being the continent of a lot of resources, of richness, and then it end up as being the continent of poverty. All African, most of the countries in Africa are very poor. The status of Africa is not good. Everything in Africa has not been ever seen to be a good. Let's break down this. Let's break down this. When the African leaders come up and start to defend themselves, they are called several names. They are called bad names. They are intimidated. They are threatened. The African people are working so hard, dying on the oceans, on their ways, not because they are going on a tour, on world tours, not because they are going for vacations, but they are going to look for the pleasure. They are going to look for the green pastures. They are going to look for something to put on their table, because their countries does not have that capability of stabilizing them. The countries are not able to give them what they deserve, what they can make them to be comfortable or to sustain their comforts. And this all has been caused by the colonizers, because when they're colonizing Africans, they take everything in Africa, and still after they have given the Africans freedom and independence, still they are still coming and they are still fighting just to realize what they have been doing for over those decades, and they're still demanding to get what they've been getting from Africa over decades. During the time of slavery, a lot happened in African land. Bloodshed, innocent souls were taken away. The people were taken from their homes against their willing. Africa had their system of governance. We had chiefs, village elders. We had a lot of people who were governing in their ways on how they wanted their people to behave and to believe. But the colonizers came and took Africans against their will. Some of them died on their way. Some of them, when they reached the colonial places, they worked forced labor. They were forced to labor with no payments, with no wages. And still today, we are, instead of Africans feel like they are free in their lands, on our own lands, we are still being dictated. We are being monetized. We are being followed up on everything that we are doing. We are not rights. We have no rights. We have no rights on our own lands. We have no rights to control our resources. We have no rights to do anything in our countries. We have to wait for some people to come and tell us what to do in our own countries. This has to stop. This has to stop, because it has been a long time. It has been a long time. And when a revolutionary like Ibrahim Traore comes up and say that we want the best for our countries, we want the best for our people, we want to stand by ourselves, we need to do what we feel it's right and it's beneficial to our citizens. It becomes a problem, a better and great problem. I am so happy and I'm grateful. This speech can make an African person release his tears, because Africa is going under hardship. African continent. Ibrahim Traore, when he wrote that letter to Pope, he was not writing the letter only for his 20 million people of Burkina Faso, but he was just trying to deliver the message covering all the African or African countries. He was trying to cry out for African continent, and that's why we're trying so hard to share these messages in black community, so that everyone, whenever they are, all the black people, whenever they are, they have to listen to this, they have to know this, and they have to stand. We have to join together our hands as African people, the black people, and we have to achieve our dreams. We have to make our wishes and our will to work, because we love Africa. This is the only place that we can fight. This is the only place. We need our generation come and find a better place, just like our freedom fighters expected the continent of Africa to be Al-Qiblan, the source of mankind. Stay tuned until next episode.